If you've been injured in a car accident, make sure you speak to our good friend Adam Burbrower at the Burbrower Law Firm. Adam and his crew do things the right way and get great results. Adam is not only the man of the hour, the man with the legal power, too sweet to be sour, he is also the excellence of elocution. Check out Adam at burbrowerlaw.com. Follow him on Facebook, and do not forget to tell him that Dan and Benny sent you.
Dan and Benny in the Ring is a podcast that everybody ought to listen to. As a matter of fact, I'm going to have Hotchkiss Featherbottom put it on my playlist because I don't know how to work that shit. But guys, in all seriousness, keep doing what you're doing. Keep plugging away. You can do it.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of Dan and Benny in the Ring, a special edition. Benny, we did it. This is episode 200. Like I said, I wouldn't be here without the Benny and Dan in the Ring. I'm joined, as always, by the player himself, Benny Scala. Benny, episode 200. How you doing, buddy?
Dan, in January of 2021, I think it was January 28th, to be precise, we interviewed the late, great Dominic DeNucci, and Dan and Benny in the Ring were born. And here we are nearly 4 years later, and we're celebrating episode number 200. What a wild ride, right? That's what she said. Anyway.
It has been. And you know what, Benny? We say it a lot on the show. The word legend gets thrown around a lot and often undeserved, but legend doesn't begin to describe the history and reputation and career of our special guest for our 200th episode, our birthday special, as it were. Benny, why don't you tell everybody who's joining us this evening?
With pleasure. And, you know, Dan, a momentous show requires a momentous guest. And boy, oh boy, do we have one. This man is like you said, a true wrestling legend, two-time Intercontinental champion, two-time tag team champion, and a WWE Hall of Famer. And plus, he's a really good guy. I am absolutely, I mean this with all my heart, absolutely thrilled to welcome Tito Santana to Dan and Benny in the Ring. Tito, welcome, sir.
Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to talking to you guys and being part of this show, 200.
Yeah, we can't thank you enough for giving us your time today. But I want to jump right into it. The first question we normally ask our guests is how and when the wrestling bug got them. I'm going to take a little bit of a different track here concerning both your wrestling career as well as your post-wrestling endeavors. It's excuse me. I mean, it's absolutely apparent you have a superb work ethic. Your reputation back then and even now for your work is amazing. Benny and I have read the great book Don't Call Me Chico, which, by the way, anywhere books can be found, right? You impressed me with the hard work. Your mom, apparently, you talked to her about her. Excuse me, you talked about her in the book, hardworking lady, almost a superwoman. I wanted to talk about that. The strong work ethic is really rare, especially in today's society. So I kind of want to spin it instead of when did you get into wrestling. We're going to touch back on that, but do you attribute the reputation, the ethic, what gave you your success to your mom?
Well, there's no doubt in my mind that my mom was a big influence. As you know, I grew up as a migrant worker, and I mean, my mom, she was tough. She prepared 2 meals while we were on the field working, and then a mid-afternoon brunch that we used to have. And I mean, I never saw her complain. And when I was much younger, from what I understand, she was 8 months pregnant and picking cotton, you know, and I never heard her complain. So I believe that, you know, she was a big influence in my life, big difference between her and my dad.
Yeah. So, Tito, this is a totally random, out of nowhere question, but I read the book. It's been a while since I read the book. I absolutely loved it. But one of the things I remembered is that you had a teenage romance where the girl's parents did not approve of you, as you were from the proverbial wrong side of the tracks. And one of my absolutely favorite movies is La Bamba, the story of Richie Valens with the great Lou Diamond Phillips. And when I read your story, I was reminded of that. Did you ever draw that same parallel?
No, I did not. I didn't really, at the time, I and even later, I didn't really think about me in comparison with La Bamba, but I did. Like I said, I came from a poor family. We were migrants, and all of a sudden, this girl, when I was a sophomore in high school, I find out that somebody has a crush on me, and I just couldn't believe it because she came from a wealthy family. And, it was kind of rough because she wasn't really able to go out with me on the up and up because of the difference in our society standings, I guess.
Right. Now, you were playing football at that time, correct?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Now, her name wasn't Donna, though, right?
No.
Okay. Just wanted, because it's eerily similar. I mean, Donna's family. I think her name was Donna Ludwig. Her parents were very wealthy. I mean, Richie was a talented musician. You were a talented athlete. A lot of parallels there.
Yeah, I mean, you can talk about success. There was he was determined to be a big success.
Yeah, driven young man for sure.
Absolutely. You mentioned sports. You've told the story before about playing football in the Canadian Football League. You said you were making about 20 grand, but got lured to professional wrestling by Joe Blanchard, who threw out figures as high as 80,000. I mean, obviously that didn't happen for a long time, but you did eventually get there. You were doing good. I am curious though. Benny and I love to throw out a question or two. Talk about other sports. Usually baseball, but I'm curious as we talk about, money will come up again. From a former football player, what do you think about some of the contracts that football players have nowadays?
Well, I mean, the contracts are unbelievable. I mean, they're making, but so are the wrestling contracts, and we didn't have contracts, when I started, all the way to the end, but they're making so much money. But what people don't understand is, in any professional sport, a player's career can end, in one game. The injuries, especially in football, the concussions and the serious injuries. I believe the football player's career, the average football player career is, I believe it's less than 3 years even.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And a lot of, unlike baseball, I think baseball, most of the contracts, the money is guaranteed no matter what.
Right.
With football, only a portion of it is. So, yeah, you're absolutely correct.
And it all depends on how good of a player you are and how good your agent was.
Yeah, I was going to say how good your agent is, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't in that level, so I didn't have an agent, and I didn't have no guarantees.
It's just mind-blowing, though. And I always make fun of the guy, Jacob deGrom, who pitched for the New York Mets. Signed a 5-year, I think, $187 million contract with the Texas Rangers. He's pitched for them for 2 seasons for a total of 40 innings. And I think he's collected $70 million so far. That money's guaranteed. So, I mean, he could not throw another pitch, and he's set for 10 lifetimes.
Yeah, I mean, he God bless him. He worked his way up, and the reason they gave it to him is because he at the time he was worth it. And God bless him. He took a chance, and they took a chance, and he got hurt, and it wasn't by his choosing that he got hurt.
Right. I don't know. There's going to be a later question where we question how soft, how the toughness of today's athletes versus, the toughness of, athletes in your generation. I think you guys, I think out of necessity, because you had families to feed and there was no guaranteed money, but it seemed like you guys were a lot grittier than the guys of today.
Well, I think in all sports, I think we were tougher, but, talk about toughness, the athlete, I believe in every sport. I mean, football, basketball, baseball. I go to some of these minor league baseball games, and pretty much every baseball player is 6'3", 6'4", 6'5", and
oh yeah,
the football players are. are huge. I heard one of the linemen talk about whenever they have the game is like having 60 head-on collisions, before the game's over. And,
Mhm.
I believe that, that they those linemen. I mean, they're going up against some big dudes, and a lot of them don't make it through a game.
Yeah, I think of a guy like Dick Butkus who played for the Bears in the 60s and 70s, and I bet like he would be too small to play today compared to these guys.
I agree with you. I mean, but he was mean. He was tough. He was nasty. He'd tackle you and twist your neck and twist your
Oh
legs
yeah,
and twist your arms, and he was out there to hurt you.
right.
And
So Tito,
nobody in today's league is cutting their thumb off at halftime to finish a game.
Well, could you repeat the question, please?
Oh no, I was just saying nobody in today's league is going to cut the tip of their thumb off so that they could finish the game.
Oh, no, they're not.
Wasn't there a guy on the Rams? I think his name was Jack Youngblood, maybe, or Hacksaw Jack Reynolds. One of them played like a half of a game with a broken leg. I mean, it's just unbelievable when you hear about things like that.
Yeah.
How bad they wanted to win, and they didn't want to leave the field under any circumstances.
All right, yeah, and I just saw, because I love to watch sports. I saw a quarterback. I forgot for what team. And he was tired and he took himself out. He tapped out. I don't know if you guys saw that. He tapped out his helmet and went to the sideline. He was
Dan, who was that?
That was what was his? You know what? It's funny. I'm drawing a blank on his name now. But yeah, he said he was exhausted.
He had to run a lot in that particular play, and he needed a break.
Wow, yeah. That is mind-boggling.
Yeah, that was the guy from the Colts.
Not
Richardson. Anthony Richardson.
Yeah. Wow, that's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So, Tito, I listened to an interview you did about a year ago, and you mentioned a bunch of names of people who helped you in your wrestling career. You mentioned something about you were in Florida and you were barely covering your expenses, with whatever you're getting when you were getting booked. And you said Terry Funk actually came to your assistance and I think got you a little bit more money. You were in Amarillo and you were promised a push, but I guess it was Dick Murdoch that didn't come through. And so Andre brought your tape to New York and showed it to Vince Sr. Harley Race, you said, helped you develop a good working punch when you were in a battle royal with him. And you said you wrestled a lot with Mr. Fuji, and he taught you a lot about psychology and things like that, storytelling. I think it speaks volumes to you, because I've always thought that, it's a very, like a dog-eat-dog profession, and everybody was clawing for their top on their spot on top. So to hear that, that you got all this assistance, I mean, everybody I mentioned was a legend. I mean, that speaks a lot for you, I think.
Well, the way I approached it, like in football, you got to practice, the beginning of the year, and you had competition and you had to work your way up. The same thing in professional wrestling. It took me a while to realize you actually were competing, even though the matches were predetermined, you were still competing for spots.
Right.
The baby, and my competition was the baby face, because I was always a baby face. So I was trying to climb. The way Terry Funk, I got started with me and Tully Blanchard came to Tampa, Florida in 1977. And I was just working out with Hiro Matsuda and Bob Orton and Bob Orton Sr., Bob Orton's father, may he rest in peace, was there working out with Barry Orton. And I started working out with them. And Terry Funk was a world champion, and he came into town to wrestle Dusty Rhodes in Tampa. And he called me, because back then they had the baby face and the heels locker rooms. So they took me to the heels locker room, and Terry asked me how I was liking it. And I said, Terry, I really like it. I said, but I don't know if I can afford to keep doing it. I said, I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to go home and start getting ready for football to go back to Canada. And he said, well, let me talk to Eddie Graham. and he spoke to Eddie Graham the next morning. They called me into the office, and I actually got to wrestle 4 times in the Tampa territory, and then Jim Barnett. Ricky Steamboat was in Atlanta, Georgia, and Jim Barnett was a promoter in Atlanta, Georgia. Also had a part ownership of Florida, and I guess he liked the looks that I had. So all of a sudden, I'm on my way to Tampa, Florida, and I got a $300 a week guarantee. From Jim Barnett.
Decent money back
1977
then, yeah.
was not bad. I could afford to live because I had an apartment fully furnished. Everything was $45 a week back then.
Wow. That's so hard to believe now, right?
Oh yeah.
Crazy.
What can you get for $45 anymore?
You might get a porta potty. Right. Not even that.
Oh my God.
That's funny. I just want a quick shout out to the chat. John, thank you so much for your generosity. Tito, John wanted you to know, he said back in the summer of '85, all he and his friends were wearing the Ariba black shirts. And so still one of his favorites. But John, thank you for your generosity. And he just wanted to shout out to you.
Thank you, John.
Looking back though, speaking of, we were talking wrestling and, obviously you were talking about bouncing around. You had your, I want to kind of jump time a little bit. You had your tag team run with Ivan Putski, another former guest. Benny, is still one of your favorite moments, having him sing to you.
Oh yeah.
And, Vince Sr. got you booked in Minnesota to go work for Vern. Obviously this time for wrestlers, typically in the territory, a few months, a few years, anywhere from a few months to a few years. And obviously you want to stay fresh. You want to keep things going as Jim Cornette, who gave us a shout out in our intro and wishes us the best of success in the Valley region of Tibet. His expression is, how can I miss you if you don't go away? Wrestlers would show up and bounce around, come back with a new gimmick, a new look, maybe heel or face. Whereas you contrast that today with wrestling every week, you get someone like The Miz, who's only been hurt twice in the better part of 2 decades. I mean, he's been on TV in some way, shape, or form for, better part of 20 years straight, without much of a change. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are, comparing that. Obviously as technology evolves, you got to keep things, because you got wrestling every week, same time, same, nationally, globally. Some blame Vince, some like it. So I'm curious what your opinions are of then versus now, the idea of the territory, bouncing around the territories versus the consistent, like you were talking about, with the consistent paycheck and the consistent TV appearances every week.
Well, you're right. I mean, most of the time you would stay around a year, and then they'd ship you out unless if you were one of the top dogs. And then when I went to the AW, well, they put the belts on me and Putski, and then when we had to drop the belts, Vince Sr. called me into his office, and he said, Tito, he said, I think you have a lot of talent, but you can, after we drop the belts to the Samoans, he said, you can stay, but if you stay, I'm going to have to start beating you. I would rather you go get more experience somewhere else, and then I'll bring you back when you're polished. And I said, I'll do whatever you want me to do. Book me wherever you want to book me. And, he asked me, well, where do you want to go? And I said, well, I'd like to go to Texas because Joe Blanchard, which was Tully Blanchard's father, was the one that, gave me the break, and got me into professional wrestling. Actually, it was him. And I said, I'd like to go to, repay, now that I'm, on my way. And I figured I could do good. I was good enough to do good in Texas. But I called Tully Blanchard. I wanted a guarantee, and Tully wouldn't give me a guarantee. And by that time, I knew, if the promoter wanted you to get over, you were going to get over, because they would give you wins on TV. And Tully says, I can't give you a guarantee, and he says, if you get over, you're going to make the money. And Tully and I had a little bit of a problem in college, and we had a misunderstanding, and to be honest with you, I threatened to beat him up, and he was hiding from me, and so Tully said, if you're going to get over, you're going to make the guarantee that you want. And I said, Tully, I said, if I'm going to get over, it's because you want me to get over. And if you don't want me to get over, I'm not going to get over. If you start beating me on TV and stuff, nobody is going to get over if you lose on TV.
Right.
So then he says, then I told Vince, I said, well, my second choice is the AWA in Minnesota. And that was the best move that I made. I got to Minnesota. It was my favorite territory. Everybody there was a main eventer. Vern used to run like St. Paul, which was like Madison Square Garden, and he would have 5 or 6 matches. But every match was a main event anywhere else in the country. So, and I learned. I mean, as a matter of fact, I was there when Dino Bravo is the one that. Dino Bravo and I had become friends in 1977, and we kind of hung out quite a bit in Atlanta, Georgia. And he said, Tito, you need a catchphrase. And he says, so then he comes, when we did the next TV, he says, before you finish your interview, get into some Spanish and then holler arriba, and throw your fist up. And that's where arriba came from. Dino Bravo was the one that
Nice.
Introduced that to me. And, like I said, it was the best move that I ever made. I mean, to listen to the guys do interviews and to tie him in. I remember Mad Dog Vachon would say interviews is 90% of your draw. You're going to draw the fans from your interviews where you create, every wrestler was a great storyteller with our interviews. And he said, wrestling is only 10%. So, Mad Dog Vachon wasn't much of a wrestler, but man, that guy could talk.
Yeah. Tito, now, if I remember right, wasn't Tully the quarterback and you were the tight end?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Tully strikes me. I mean, I never met the guy, but he strikes me as having that quarterback prima donna mentality. And I could be wrong, but I always thought that about him.
Yeah, he was a bit of a prima donna, and he was came from a pretty well-to-do family. Joe Blanchard was the owner of South Championship Wrestling, and so he didn't have to struggle in life.
And yeah, plus he had a job waiting for him after college, right?
Right. Yep.
Yeah. So, Tito, you were a 2-time Intercontinental champion, and I did the calculation. If my math was right, total of 442 days from February 84 through February 86. And, when you think about the huge amount of talent in the WWE during that time period, that's really an impressive feat. Now, I started watching wrestling in 1968. It was the first time I ever went to a show. So, I understand when the Intercontinental title came into being in 1979, how important it was. But I think nowadays it's, in my opinion, they've tried. I mean, giving it to Gunther, I think he added a lot of credibility to it. But by and large, for the last 15, 20 years, it's kind of been a prop. But back then, it was to me, and I'm a fan of the territories. To me, the Intercontinental Championship in the WWF and the Missouri title in the NWA were I think the 2 most important secondary titles in the country. So, for the benefit of those who are not quite as old as I am, could you please explain how significant it was to be the Intercontinental champion in the 1980s?
Well, when I got the belt from Don Morocco the first time, he had feuded with the Jimmy Superfly Snuka, and I mean they had an unbelievable feud, but Jimmy Snuka did not get the title belt from him. They had a fantastic cage match in Madison Square Garden, and then when I got it, man, it elevated me to the top. And Bobby Heenan was kind of working in the office in the WWF, and he told me because you wouldn't hear it from the office because they didn't want you to know how much you were getting over. But he told me, he says, Tito, your shirts are outselling Hulk Hogan's shirts. I just want you to know that.
Wow.
Keep it to yourself.
Wow.
And I only had that one black shirt,
Damn.
the Ariba on it. So it was significant to be the Intercontinental champion. All over the country. You got notoriety, and you were one of the top guys in the country, in the world.
Yeah, no, that's so true, and it's great. Actually, I kind of want to keep that because obviously at this point you're very well into your WWF run. Phil, by the way, Phil, thank you so much for your generosity. He wanted to ask you a question, Tito, about. He said he asked about the reverse Indian deathlock into a bridge finisher. He also from the kid in him wants to know what was your peak height weight, because he said he remembers you being larger than life when he met you as a kid.
The most I ever weighed was 245 pounds. And that finish that you're talking about, the reverse bridge, I don't know what we called it. George Scott gave me that finish, and it was a great finish. I mean, it was getting over, but every time I would do the bridge, I would land on my head, and I was knocking the heck out of my head. I just said, I don't know how many times I can keep doing this before I knock myself out. So I changed it, and I think I first started doing the flying cross body block, and then I don't know where I came up with the flying forearm that ended up being probably the best finish I had.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of memorable moments throwing that flying forearm too, especially somebody my age, watching it.
Just as a reference point, Dan, Phil was in the chat with my True Crime podcast last night, and he mentioned that he learned that hole from Tito, and I think he applied it to his little brother. So, but I mean, Tito should be not held, to blame for any of that.
Oh my God.
Well, while we're on the topic of your WWF run, a question that comes up a lot, I know you've answered it a bunch. It's popped up a few times in the chat. They want to hear the story of your billing. Obviously, you were billed. You were billed from Mexico. Was the story of your family and how that came about?
Well, I was born in Mission, Texas. And so I was born in the U.S., but when I was coming into New York City I believe I first came into New York in 1979. Before I came in, Vince called me up and told me, he says, I want you to think of a name that you like. So and think of a city that you from Mexico that you want to be from. So I said, I like the last name Santana. And, Vince liked that. And they told me, you're going to be Tino Santana, Tino Santana. And I said, Toluca, Mexico. So Toluca, Mexico was just right outside of Mexico City. So I just went on the map and I just saw it and it stuck out. So I said, let's go with Toluca, Mexico. So every time I got into the ring and I got announced, Howard Finkel could not say Toluca, he would say Tocula. and I would say, Howard, it's Toluca. And finally I said, oh, hell with it, it's Tocula. So anyway, I did my first tape, my first match on TV, and they used to record them back then. So I went out and I signed a few autographs, which I'm sure if anybody has them would be pretty valuable, as Tino, Tino Santana. And when I came through the curtains, Vince Jr. and Vince Sr. were waiting for me to come through. And they told me, I said, from now on, you're going to be Tito Santana. And I said, call me whatever you want to call me. I'm just happy to be here. So that's where the name came from. And that's where Tocula, Mexico came from, the mispronunciation of Howard Finkel.
Tito is one of 2 Hall of Famers that come from fictitious towns. The other one is Stan Stasiak from Buzzards Creek, Oregon. I did some research. There is no such thing.
That's funny. Well, so Betty had asked earlier about the your IC title reign. You originally won it from Don Baracco. You lost it to Greg Valentine, won it back from Valentine, and then of course famously lost it to Randy Savage. I wanted to talk about the in between there, your feud with Greg Valentine. I mean, you have Zbyszko, San Martino that comes up a lot, Rich Sawyer, but your feud with Valentine is really one of the best ones. And definitely as far as the crowd reactions, really one of the biggest feuds of that time. Well, and I'm curious if you have any thoughts, like what was it about you and Valentine that were able to keep the fans so invested for what, the better part of 3 years?
Well, you're right. I mean, we used to beat the crap out of each other. That's what we had invested into that feud. But, I was in Erie, Pennsylvania before we flew into Brentford, Ontario to do TV taping. And I was wrestling Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, and Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff put me on a crossed leg, and he bent my leg too far, and my cartilage popped.
Oh,
so I could. I mean, I was on stretch on a what do you call those things that you walk with?
Like a crutch.
Crutch. I was on crutches. And I walked into they were having their production meeting in Brentford, Ontario. As a matter of fact, Andre the Giant helped me to my hotel that night. We were in Pittsburgh. We wrestled in Erie and drove to Pittsburgh by the airport. Andre helped me get to the hotel, and I walked into the production meeting in my crutches, and I told Vince. I said, Vince, I said, I don't think I can wrestle. I said, but I do have an injury. I said, something's wrong. I'm going to have to go see the doctor. But I came in and I said, but I would like to, make some money out of this injury. And I thought I was going to have a feud with Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, but George Scott was there. He was the booker at the time, and he loved Greg Valentine. And they didn't trust Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff because he would lose his temper and tell everybody to go screw themselves. So we figured out, I taped my knee up real good, and I knew I couldn't do much. So, I came in through the ropes. I don't know if you remember that angle, and as soon as I got through the ropes, Greg put a beating to me and then put the figure 4 leg lock.
It was a quick match, yeah.
Right, yeah. And then they carried me out on a stretcher, and then I had the surgery the following week, and Vince sent the film crew, and they taped the surgery, as a matter of fact. And the guys who were going to be doing the interview afterwards, I told them, because I know that when I'd had the surgery before, and when they put you under, you're a little groggy.
Yeah, you're tipsy, yeah.
Right. So I told the guys, I said, as soon as I opened my eyes, hit me with the question. And that's what happened. As soon as they got me out and I opened my eyes, and the people really believed, that Greg had messed up my knee, and little did they know it was Mr. Wonderful the night before. But then I had the surgery, and 2 weeks later, I had my first match in Madison Square Garden against Greg the Hammer Valentine. And I mean, we did some pretty heavy duty interviews, because it was legit. It is something that you could really dig in and talk about it, and people could feel the pain. And I told Greg, the first I taped my knee again, and I told Greg, I said, I can't do a lot, Greg, but I said, what I think we should do is I go in the ring and I charge you and I take you down, and we just fight like dogs, in the ring. And, that's what we did. I beat the crap out of him in the ring, and then he left the ring and he got counted out. And, I acted like I wanted to go after him, and the referee kept me in the ring. And you know, the people loved our matches, and the endings that we would leave them with, were always pretty well thought out, and we mixed the interviews with something that the people could feel, and I would never lie to the fans, and I would never say, to the fans that I was going to do something that I never did, So whatever I said, I was able to do, and like we knew our finishes from show to show. And you're right. I mean, we had every type of match. We had we had in Madison Square Garden. We had time ran out. They shut the lights off in Madison Square Garden, so we were the main event, and we couldn't finish the match. The next time we came, no time limit. Then we did lumberjack matches. We did tape feast matches. We did I forgot what we did pretty much everything that you could have done. We did all over the country, and what was good back then is we'd have the same match all over the country. And back then you didn't have the internet, and people didn't know what was going on from one town to another.
Right, you're seeing it for the first time, right? Yeah.
Right, yeah. So it was the for the first time, and it worked really well, and the people. I used to come home and I used to tell my wife, I've had easier street fights than wrestling, with Greg Valentine, because I don't know if you guys know, Greg was like a pit bull. I mean, if he would keep coming after you, and if you didn't stop him, he'd just keep beating the crap out of you. So I would just give him enough, and then I'd fight back. I'd give him enough and fight back, and finally we'd had unbelievable endings, and then we had something else to talk about. We always left the people on the edge where I should have won the match, but I didn't.
Tito, I got to tell you, because when that happened, I think I was about 31. So I knew what the score was by then as far as what wrestling was all about. But I have to tell you, when after he hurt you, and then you did that interview in the hospital, that was very emotional. I really got caught up in it. It's like, man, he's going to get that title back. And that was really, really good. I mean, that drew me in very quickly.
Yeah. I mean, we were selling out without Hulk Hogan. I hate to be patting myself on the shoulder, but, you also had the rest of the card. There was always good matches and good workers. But who was the one that was responsible for the sellouts? Was the main event, and we were the main event, selling out big buildings without Hulk Hogan. And I remember Hulk Hogan came up to us in Boston, and he says, "Man, I heard you guys sold out." Because it wasn't happening before, and we sold out Detroit, and we were the first ones to sell out Detroit even before Hogan, and because the people. Yeah, I am going to pat myself in the back. I'm a much better worker than Hulk Hogan ever was. He got the bigger push.
Oh, God, yeah.
He got over.
No argument from us
Not
on
even
that one.
close.
Yeah,
but he
not at all.
He did.
So we have another donation. See, Tito, you're still drawing money all these years later. It's from John Gallagher. And it says, tell Tito thanks for my all-time favorite match, Tito and Steamboat versus Valentine and Beefcake at the Maple Leaf Gardens, April 1985, I guess, right after WrestleMania 1. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do. Ricky Steamboat, and myself, they say there might be maybe one or two other guys that never turned heel. But, what an honor it was. I as a matter of fact, when I went to Atlanta, Georgia, they changed my name to Richard Blood, and Richard Blood was Ricky Steamboat's real name. And Jim Barnett was pretty upset that they let Ricky Steamboat go from Atlanta, because he went to Charlotte, and he was over like $1 million in Charlotte, wrestling for George Scott, and to be able to work with him. And I mean, Ricky was smooth. I mean, he was a great performer.
Yeah. Tito, this is a question that was a little bit off the script, but I thought of this after I sent you the list of questions, but I think it's a really important question. One of my favorite wrestlers ever was Pedro Morales. Great champion, did very, very well at Madison Square Garden. But my understanding is eventually, they brought Bruno back in for, because he wasn't drawing in a lot of the towns around the East Coast. I mean, he did great at the Garden, did great in Philly, but like places like Baltimore and DC and things, he didn't draw that well. And so that, eventually, and I mean, still, Pedro's a legend, but I wanted to contrast that with you, same, Hispanic origin, not quite. I mean, he was from Puerto Rico, but I guess I want to contrast it with you in that you seem to, wherever you went, you connected with the fans. Pedro, I believe, was in the AWA at some point after he left the WWF in the 70s, and he didn't click in the Midwest. But it seems like wherever you went, Mid-South, Georgia, Florida, AWA, you clicked everywhere. So what do you attribute that to?
Well, Pedro, Pedro was a fantastic worker. I mean,
yeah. Love Pedro.
I think what happened with Pedro was the fact that back then you needed the English interview. You need to be able to get the message across, in English, and being that he was a baby face, the heels that couldn't talk, they would give him a manager like,
Albano, Blassie,
Fred Blassie, the Wizard.
Yeah,
the Viz had those three managers, and those guys could do some interviews for their guys. And Pedro did not have, and Pedro was not the type of guy that could carry a good interview in English. Like most of my interviews were in English, and then I would kind of raise my temper, in Spanish, and then holler the arriba at the end. And my thought was, when I kicked into Spanish, the people knew I was really pissed, and then I would holler arriba and I would leave. But Pedro and I teamed up quite a bit, and I thought they were going to put the belts on us, but they never did. I wish they would have given him and I a run, with the tag team champions. He was a real good friend of mine.
I think that would have worked. I mean, in the WWF, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, it was, I wish they would have, because we wrestled together quite a bit.
Yeah, he's one of my all-time favorites. I mean, yeah, he very limited, as far as an interview, it was pretty much he said the same things every time. But man, once he got in the ring, man, he was a ball of fire.
Oh yeah, I mean, and he was a tough guy.
Yeah. So, Tito, we kind of touched on this before. I talked about Jacob deGrom making $70 million. And then because I've been a baseball fan for most of my life. I mean, I think I went to my first game at Yankee Stadium in 1964. But you got guys like Bob Gibson, Juan Marichal, Seaver, Steve Carlton. Those guys would throw 300 innings year after year after year. Start 40 games every fourth day. Throw 300 innings. Maybe throw like 30 complete games a year, which is probably more than any of these guys have for their career. And you mentioned that you had that knee surgery, and you were back at it with. I think you actually wrestled after you lost. According to we use WrestlingData.com to do a lot of research, and that actually had you at the Keel, I think, on September 28th, which is 4 days after you dropped the title. I think you wrestled Orndorff there, but you were with Valentine. What, like you said, in a matter of weeks. In an era we live nowadays where these guys, they have, they blow out a knee, they're out for the year. Even an ankle, they're out for 2 months. Hamstring, 6 weeks. How did you had pretty major, significant knee surgery, and you're back at it within a matter of weeks?
Well, I think if you didn't wrestle, you didn't get paid.
No PTO in wrestling, right?
Right. Yeah. So I because I played football, I learned how to tape a knee, and I would tape a knee, and then had a brace, and then the knee pad. So I had a lot of support, but I was smart enough to know that an injured Tito Santana was not going to be doing a lot of flying in the air. I kind of changed my style of wrestling for what I could do. And the guys that I was wrestling with against, worked with me. It was good. I mean, back then, every guy that you step into the ring was unbelievable. Like I tell people, for the first 5 years, I was always learning. I was always working with somebody who was better than me, who was teaching me, and I was humble, and I would go up to the guys and I would say, "Can you give me some advice?" Whenever somebody gives you I don't know about you guys, if anybody has ever given you, I'm in the ring working my butt off, and they're giving me constructive criticism, telling me what I'm doing wrong, and it's hard to take negative advice from somebody. You're thinking, you're doing the best you can, and they're knocking your work, but they were just trying to help me,
Right.
and because I asked them to give me, watch and tell me where I can improve. And all those guys were great workers, and just learning how to throw a punch. I remember Greg Gagne in the AWA. I guess my punches weren't as that great before I had gotten with Harley Race. Greg says, Tito, don't throw a punch to the face. Just practice throwing your punches. And he showed me how to throw a punch to the stomach. And once you get real comfortable with the stomach, then work away to the neck. And then once you get comfortable with the neck, because you're not going to hurt anybody, throwing a punch to the neck, and throw to the forehead. Then I got to the point where I could throw a right or a left right to the mouth, right to the teeth or the nose, and not worry about, breaking any teeth or breaking anybody's nose. But I think just learning and releasing yourself from the fear of potatoing. If you land a punch too hard, we used to call it potato. Mm-hmm. And if you gave somebody like Harley Race a potato, he'd give you a receipt. And some of those guys, I mean, we had so many tough guys that eat you up and spit you out like anything, So once you lose the fear of hurting somebody, I think then you can become real. Cause, even my kids would say, Dad, we can't tell that you're throwing a fake punch, because I would throw it right to the spot that I was throwing it. And they would laugh because, as you see me wearing glasses, my vision is not that great, but, I could still see close enough. And, I never potatoed anybody that I think of.
Nice. I want to jump back to the chat real quick. Very active. Everybody's really excited to have you on the show. B40 asked if you remember the contest where the winner got a New York City date, or a date with you out in New York City, a dinner, I should say.
Yes, I do. I think it was a young kid. And if I remember correctly, unless if it was a different place where there was a kid that won the contest, and his parents came along.
Well, the reason that he wanted to ask if you remember, because apparently it was a friend of the family that won the contest. So he thought, how life comes full circle.
Oh yeah. I mean, they used to do stuff like that back then, which I thought was a great idea.
Who actually promoted that though? Was it the WWF?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Nice. So, Tito, a further testament to your durability. You had a very long career, both in the WWF and overall. But you and Hogan, I think, are the only wrestlers to have matches in the first 9 WrestleManias. So, I think that's a testament to your health and your durability. But I think it's also a great testament to your relevance, that you stayed on top and you stayed relevant, and people were still invested in you. I wanted you to see what you thought about that.
Well, it's kind of sad. I was in the WWF longer than anybody, including Hulk Hogan. in my run, when I left in '93, I had been there longer than anybody else, and I'd have to say that some of these wrestlers that I've heard comments that say, "Yeah, Tito became a jobber at the end," you know, and then somebody posted something that said that I had the most wins in the history of the WWF, and I just I don't like to get into talking about getting into fights with fans, about situations that I was in, but I said, I was on top for many, many years, and I had the most wins in the history of the WWF. Somebody had to put me over, and in our business, there comes a time when you have to do the job to get somebody else over. That's the nature of our business.
That's the torch, right?
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, right, and for somebody in the same business to talk about, I think it's jealousy. They talk about because I know they tried to replace me with Hispanics, but they didn't work out. So they would keep me, because I was, my last WrestleMania was in Las Vegas. It was a dark match, but it was still WrestleMania.
Right.
So yeah, I was in the first 9 WrestleManias along with Hulk Hogan, and I was always honored to be in the same territory as Hulk Hogan. And Hulk Hogan was drawing money pretty much from the start. So I was always making money because I was in the same territory as Hulk was.
But Tito, even in '93, because again, that WrestlingData.com website, it does give won-loss records. And I looked in '93, you still won the majority of your matches. It wasn't, you weren't doing an over. You were, you were getting the victory still.
Yeah. I mean, so I don't know what why. That's why I believe it's jealousy. Why do people have to say Tito became a jobber? I was never a jobber.
Right.
They would put me with guys that were gonna go up and wrestle Hulk Hogan. So if they beat Tito Santana, it meant something. So he deserved to get a shot at Hulk Hogan.
Right.
But
that's whatever. What they did in the '70s with either Dominic Tanucci or Jay Strongbow. The heel that came in, if they beat Strongbow or Tanucci, then the next step was to wrestle Bruno.
Right. I mean, that's the nature of our business, and
right.
Would I prefer to be winning every match and being like Hulk Hogan? Yeah, but there was only one Hulk Hogan.
Right.
I was very happy with my position, and I don't know if you ever heard of the guys, Razor Ramon. I don't know if you guys ever heard how he got his name. I was in. Did you ever hear that?
No,
you mean how
he got it? No.
Scott Hall settled on that? No, I'd love to hear that story.
Well, I was in the urinal, going to the number 2 in the urinal, and Razor was coming into the territory. He says, "Tito, I need a name, a Spanish name that rhymes with razor." I said, "Ramon." So he ran out and he took it to Vince and he says, "Razor Ramon," and they liked it, But I remember that Razor Ramon used to drive up and down the road, and he mentioned that in some interview, and he said that everybody wanted to do the Tito thing. Tito had been in the territory for many, many years, and my family was important to me, and I had a great position. They wanted, a lot of guys would die to have my position in the business.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, it's like you said, the jealousy, those guys that are wanting to hate on your run in 93 or 92, 93, they only wish they could have had half the career that you did.
Right.
But I want to look, I've got kind of a follow-up, as it were. You were talking about, you mentioned staying face your whole run. It's kind of a 2-part question. 1, is it true? And 2, where it goes from there. The story is the legend is that when they broke up Strikeforce when you and Rick Martel went your separate ways, that you actually approached Vince wanting to turn heel and he shot it down. So part one, is that true? And as someone who spent so many years as a beloved babyface, including after that run, what was in your mind for a heel Tito Santana?
I was probably thinking about kind of Mr. Wonderful style, Ted DiBiase style, a good wrestler, but a little cocky, and getting the fans involved. It was true, when they told us that they were going to split us up. We were in California, and Rick Martel came and Vince brought us into a meeting, and he said, Rick's going to have to take some time off. His wife is ill. And I asked Vince, a couple of days later, I said, Vince, can I be the heel when he comes back? And he says, no. He says, there's so many things that I can still do with you as a baby face. I want you as a baby face. And I said, okay. So I never got the opportunity to turn heel, which I wish I had at least found out if I could have done it, because I knew that I was a good worker as a baby face, and I saw baby faces that turned heel that were not as good as I was, with the psychology, and they were able to manage it. So I figured, I know I can do it, but I never got the chance.
Well, I want to expand on something you mentioned when you talked about the everybody that come into the territory and they kind of want to be the next Tito Santana. You wrestled in an era when a lot of commentary and things that were said in promos would never fly today. You were, or I should say, maybe the Tito Santana character, some of the commentary, some of the promos, very racially inclined. Did that bother you at all, or did that just go with the character?
That went with the character, because you had like the Bobby Heenans, Jesse the Body Ventura, and Captain Lou Albano. Those guys were over so big that the more they knocked you, helping you get over with the fans. So it never bothered me. When I'd get to arenas, and I remember wrestling was so hot, and the fans were waiting outside, and they'd be hollering Chico, Chico, and that used to piss me off. And because I didn't know that it was Jesse the Body who was calling me Chico on the interviews.
Yeah.
Until one Saturday morning, I forget where I was, and I hear Jesse calling me Chico, and I said, "That's where the fans are getting it from," But Jesse and I were good friends, and Jesse was helping me out.
Yeah. Tito, while you were talking about turning heel, I thought of something. So I don't know how much you've watched like the current product, but I really liked Alberto Del Rio. I thought he was a very good worker, but the thing with him is he was great as a heel, but I guess they turned him babyface a couple of times, and he didn't really connect with the fans. But now that I think of it, I think that would have been a perfect, gimmick for you as a heel, just to reinvent you with, that you came from, Mexican royalty and come out in the fancy cars and I think that would have went over big time. Just my opinion.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know if you remember, I think was it a Monday Night Raw, where they brought me in to introduce Alberto Del Rio on Monday Night Raw.
Oh, did you know?
Yeah, that's the first time I ever met him, and the guy was a good-looking guy. He was a big Mexican also, and he was a pretty good worker.
Very talented.
I don't know why he didn't get over. I thought he would get over better.
I think a lot of it was his backstage antics, unfortunately.
Speaking of one-offs, something that's come up in the chat a few times, and it got me thinking. You said you had the one-off on Raw where you introduced Del Rio. You also had a one-off WCW event. You were brought in to wrestle Jeff Jarrett during a storyline where they were bringing in different legends to wrestle him. How did that call go? Or was that just kind of a favor? How did that come about?
I don't know. They called me from WCW, and it was Jimmy Snuka, he was going to be wrestling three of us: Jimmy Snuka, myself, and George the Animal Steele. And he wrestled all three of us, and all three of us beat him that night.
Wow. Okay. So, Tito, every time I go into an old school chat room on Facebook, and I've even saw it in the chat tonight. When Bret Hart, and I think you've mentioned it before, that when Bret Hart became champion, you were told that you were in the running. And, that this is just one man's opinion, but I thought you had a far better body of work. You had the legacy. You had the solo titles, plus the tag team titles. Plus I think you were way more, your interviews were far better. And like I said, you do not see a chat room where people say Tito would have been a great world champion. Did you have a chance to present your case to Vince as far as why you thought you would be a good one, or did he just...
No, I don't know if you guys remember. I think it was in '92 when I beat The Undertaker in Barcelona, Spain. I was El Matador already. They were, from what I understand, they were grooming me to be the world champion. And Pat Patterson kept telling me, we're going to go to Mexico, we're going to go to South America, we're going to go to Central America. But he wasn't telling me that they were grooming me to be the world champion. But when I beat The Undertaker, I kind of felt something. But the peso, the devaluation of the peso was so low, I think it was a business decision eventually that Vince made, to go into the country and spend all that money and then bring pesos that were a lot less than the dollar. I think the peso was 35 pesos to a dollar back then. So we wrestled in Toronto. I think it was a pay-per-view or something, and they have a big meeting, and they're in the meeting, and then Pat Patterson comes up to me and he says, Tito, says, the reason we were in the meeting is we were deciding who we were going to put the belt on, and Vince decided to go with Bret Hart. So, I was kind of pissed off. I said, you didn't need to tell me that, I didn't want to know that I came in second place. And then a few minutes later, DiBiase comes and tells me, yeah, Pat Patterson came and told me that it was between me and Bret Hart. There was a couple other guys so they came out and bullshitted a few of us that we were in the running, when all along they knew they were going to be going into Canada instead of Mexico and South America and Central America.
Well, yeah. Makes sense.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Well, Tito, as we get ready to wrap up here, and this has been such a treat for me. I'm curious. I want to talk. It's kind of a final question. Your life, obviously, after not just WWF, but after wrestling. I know you were you did a lot of training. You worked with some of the young talent. After you left the WWF, you did the ECW title, the American Federation. But then, besides wrestling and training, you were an educator for many years, only retiring, I believe, about a year ago from teaching, which I truly respect. So I'm curious, one, how did the students react to holy crap, my teacher's the Intercontinental champion? And what keeps you busy nowadays?
Well, when I became a teacher, it was my wife. I already had my degree because I graduated in 4 years from when I was playing football. My wife kept saying, "Why don't you teach? Why don't you teach?" Because I was sitting around all week doing nothing, and then I started subbing, and then I got a teaching job, and for me, teaching was very rewarding for me because I know that it was my 8th grade gym teacher who made a big difference in my life. And I felt if I can touch somebody, in teaching, and if I can make a difference in somebody's life, it'll be worth it. Well, little did I know, teaching is not an easy profession. The first thing you have to learn is classroom management. And that's one of the hardest things that you can learn, how to control the kids. My very first subbing position that I had, and I was in the town and everybody knew who I was I went to it was a classified class, and it was seniors, and I walk in and they're making animal noises my very first day, and I say, "What am I going to do?" And I'm sitting on the desk figuring out, reading, pretending like I'm reading the lesson plans, and I said, "I can't send the guys to the office because then they know that I can't handle the classroom." So I figured out who it was. Like they were making elephant noises, lion noises, dog noises, and finally I got up and I figured out who. I waited till I figured out who the guys were making the noise were. So I walked to the back of the room and I said, "You, and you go to the front of the room." And they said, "We're not going to the front of the room." I said, then I gave them my interview voice. I said, "Go to the front of the room." And they knew I was serious, and they got up and went. And I said, "Guys, your animal sound effects are fantastic." I said, "Now you have an audience. Keep going. Do it for all of us. I want to be part of it." And I ain't going to do that. I ain't going to do that. And I said, "Well, sit down. One more sound effect and you're out of here." And I mean, nobody teaches you how to handle that. I don't know. I don't know why that came to my mind, that I figured to do that, but it worked. And I think you had a follow-up question to that. Everybody, because I live in a small town, and I was teaching in the town that I'm at, and everybody knew who I was. I mean, we'd have back to school days, and my class, all the parents wanted to come to back to school to see Tito Santana, which was pretty cool.
Probably the most involved some of those dads were in after school activities, right?
Yeah.
Well, the follow up was obviously you've retired from teaching. You're still, you have your convention and independent appearances. I was just asking what you're up to, where our fans could find you today, if out and about.
Well, I make usually like WrestleCons, or I make appearances. They usually, announce them on Facebook and different places. But I'm not out on the road that much like a lot of the other guys. Like in November, I have one date, September 17th. November 17th, I'm going to be in Brooklyn, somewhere in Brooklyn, two different places. And then in December, I don't have anything. I don't like to really travel in the winter if I don't have to. I don't want to get caught up in snowstorms.
Right. No,
but mostly because I have a torn, I have a torn meniscus on my left knee. So I can't, it's been over 2 years that I haven't wrestled. So I don't wrestle anymore. But I do from time to time. If they have a good big wrestling show, they bring me in to sign autographs. I might, do a promo in the ring or referee, but nothing where I'm going to have to take any bumps.
Okay.
I love going to different places and seeing the fans because we've been hit in the head a few times and I've forgotten a lot of like some of the stuff that you guys have asked me. You remind me of my past, and you bring back good memories that I have and the wrestling fans. I mean, you guys know if the wrestling fan loves you, I mean, they love you till the end, and
right.
They support you. They don't like you. They don't like you. That's the way it is.
Well, I know as far as your appearances and various fan activities go, I don't know if y'all can see this. I've had this one on my wall since I was a kid. So getting a chance to talk to you, I want everybody to understand. For those that can't see it, it's an old autographed WWF photo. There's the that was the change when you went to the gray, the second shirt.
That's right.
You had the black Ariba, and then you had the one with Santana and the big letters.
I have quite a few. I have a Facebook. I have a group, Tito Santana, official Tito Santana group, and then I have a Merced Solis Facebook. So I have two Facebooks, and I still have fans that order. I have 8x10s. I have T-shirts. I have my book, Don't Call Me Chico, and a lot of them send me personal items to they reach out to me, and then I get their address, and I give them my address, and they send personal items for me to sign here at home. And I'm still involved with the fans, and I do cameo shout outs. As a matter of fact, pretty inexpensive. I was charging $25.99, and
Oh wow.
they asked me to lower my price for a weekend, and uh, uh, the amount of people that were asking for shout outs tripled. So I lowered it to 15, and I was only going to keep it for a week, and I decided to keep it, and I do 3 times as much shout outs
Right.
at $15, and I was doing it $25.99. So I still do quite a bit of shout outs, cameo shout outs for the fans, and I get a lot of 5 stars.
That's great. And it's nice to see the cut, the amount for the fans, because you see some of them, people out there wanting $5,000 for a few seconds. It's crazy. But Benny, to episode 200, we keep chugging along. We say it all the time. Not bad for something that started with a couple of microphones and a laptop 3 years. How many years ago now? But
Almost 4, yeah.
Yeah, almost 4 years coming up. It's been great. Tito, thank you so much for your time. Benny, final thoughts to you. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I did want to say hello from Mike, Monte, and Jimmy Pharaoh. You were on their show,
Yes.
I believe, a year or two ago, and but I have to say that 200 episodes. Our first interview was with Dominic DiNucci. One was with Tito's partner Ivan Putski. We've had Jimmy Valiant. We've had Steve Kern, Ken Patera, Bugsy McGraw, and it's just I can't say like I watched you when I was growing up, Tito, because we're only 2 years apart in age. But I mean, I watched you as in my younger years, and it never gets old talking to a legend and talking wrestling. And I always use the word with Jimmy Valiant. He was on our show several times. I use the word beloved when I described him. But I have to say that I have to give you that same word. You are still, you last wrestled in the WWF, 31 years ago, and people still absolutely love you. So, that's a legacy. And like you said, once they love you, then they're going to love you forever. And they sure have.
Well, it's guys like you that keep the legacy going, and I appreciate you guys, and thank you so much for having me on your 200th episode.
Well, we appreciate it. Again, I can't thank you enough for your time. It's been great. Episode 200. Dan and Benny, we got a lot of good stuff coming up. Joined on our special 200th episode by the legend himself, Tito Santana. Again, thank you all to our friends Monte and the Pharaoh on YouTube. We've been live. This has been great stuff. Thank you so much to the chat. We would never have gotten to episode 200 without everybody that's joining us live every week. Of course, Dan and Benny, we can be found anywhere podcasts are listened to. So for the legend himself, Tito Santana, for the playa himself, Benny Scala, I'm Dan Sebastiano. Have a good night, everyone, and we will see you next time we're in the ring.